Ben here with Studio on the Lake. Hey, so this is number 6 in the watercolor and Studio on the Lake watercolor painting. You need to reference Jordy's kit for the colors, and it's just simple colors, Roy G. Biv, colors of the rainbow, like you learned as a kid. So here's the one on the left is the one we're doing today. I just threw the snowman in there. I'm trying to find some footage. I think I lost a lot of the footage of the snowman, and I didn't complete him. He was a concept, but I really like him, and I am gonna do redoing this guy. Now I'll put a lot more stuff in there. It's gonna be kind of an intermediate when we get there. But here's a beginner, and we're about done with Christmas cards. I'm just batting clean up here in the new year on the video I have. So there's one I did on the left, the standard one that I normally do, and then there is the one that I did on the right for you there. You see just a little bit of difference in the colors. So these are cards that I get in a box, and I don't remember how many are in there, 50 or 100, with envelopes, and they're already set up. They're about 5 by 7, something like that. So I set that up. I'm using the watercolor kit that we built for Jordy, and you can see that I've got a line in the background where the hill comes across the middle of the frame and then comes down towards the right. So it's like he's walking over a hill. I started to draw that in there, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous because it's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So I just got water on my brush, and I'm using the big round there that's in the kit, and kind of a medium amount of water on this. This isn't like the Arches 140 or 300 pound paper that requires a lot of water. This takes a little bit less water, and you can see that I drew the hill down there, starting about halfway up on the left and then coming down the right. So there's the kit, same exact paints that we sent to Jordy, and hopefully they'll get there one of these days. But don't paint directly out of the paint compartment. Take it out with a clean brush and put it in the large areas, and then wash your brush before you dip it back in there. Otherwise, you'll end up with a big muddy mess and mixing them in there. So there's the hill I was talking about. And this is just probably a cobalt blue that I put in there, or a phthalo blue. I don't remember. You can choose your own. Okay, it is a cobalt blue. And then I wanted it to have kind of a green tint in the background. So I put it on in a rough pattern there. And now I'm just going to add kind of with the side of the brush and let the paper pull that off, a little bit of the texture that's in the paper. Now this is another one in the line of the salt of the earth kind of thing, and I'm going to show you. This one was not salted on the left, but the one on the right is going to get the salt treatment, since everybody seems to like that. So I wanted to put in just a hint in the background. And keep in mind, this is wet on wet at this point, and it's moving stuff around. Blue and yellow make green. We can get away with that here because there's going to be green trees in there. But this is wet, and it's all going to mix in together, which is one of the beauties of watercolor. So while I was here, I decided to go ahead and throw just a little bit of background green in. And we will repaint these trees at a later date. This is going to diffuse and dry really lightly. You'll notice I'm kind of trying to stay out of where I'm going to put the gnome in there. Not 100%, but I am kind of leaving a little bit of space there. So once again, this green I put in there is going to diffuse. You can see it on the right there, the wet on the wet. It's going to just give you a blur. So anything that's in the background in perspective, if you think about it, it's blurred. The detail is not there. It has soft edges. And here I'm kind of wiping away to get a little bit of a harder edge. I don't want this down into the snow. You can see how soft that's starting to get in the background. It's got a hint of that yellow in there where it's going to be light. So we're getting ready for the $100 trick here, and it's pretty straightforward. Any kind of salt will work. The bigger granules will put bigger flakes on there, and you can see I already salted that. Those dark specks are the salt. Now what the salt does is it absorbs the water and it absorbs the paint and leaves a light there. And this I put into a time lapse, and it's kind of cool. I just set the time lapse there, and you can see what's happening with this, where the salt is sucking up the paint and the water, and it leaves a really cool snow effect. If you're doing some kind of a psychedelic thing or a flower thing, this salt trick also works. The secret is to not overdo it. And once you do this, you do it wet on wet, so the paper has to be wet, the paint has to be wet, and then you sprinkle the salt on where you want it. And it's pretty awesome the way it comes out. So that was a time lapse, and I let it completely dry. One of the tricks of watercolor is you got to let it dry. So now I'm just taking my fingers and hand and brushing the salt off. And it's kind of rock hard, and it rolls off there really nicely. So there's the effect we've got in the background, and a lot of you liked that in the last video, so I thought I would show you that once again. Now here's just a quick couple of things that I did messing around with color and salt, and you can see what that did in there. So now we're not wet, we're painting dry, just like you would with acrylics per se. And it is a little transparent, but it does a nice job. The red does a nice job of covering over the green. And I'm just going to paint his hat in. I've got the reference photo to the left, or card, that I did at some point in the past to the left there. And when you paint dry like this, you tend to have a little harder edges. Well, in this case, we want a harder edge because this guy is in front of the trees behind. So behind, further in the background, things are blurry. Things that are in the foreground tend to have more detail. They tend to have more lines that are defined, what we call a hard edge versus a soft edge. And you'll see later on with a little black ink pen, I'm going to put even harder edges on some of this. So I'm trying to leave the white of his beard and figure out where that's going to go. So here's the hand that's going to hold the lantern. The white that's being left between his hat and the hand in there is going to be beard. Doing the same thing on the left side. Where would the beard go? It'd probably go right in there. And this hand is kind of down. I'm balancing out the other hand. So without drawing it in, I'm saying there'd be a foot right here, or sticking out right about there. I've still got the beard in the middle. And now we're going to etch or kind of draw around where the beard would come down. These will lighten up quite a bit. I can come back with some water if I wanted to and lighten up one side of it. On this, light source would obviously be the lantern. That'd be on the right, and then the darker stuff would be to the left. So once again, looking where his beard is at and putting that foot in. This foot is the one that is up in the air in a cartoon sort of manner. And to get these right, you can actually draw these in if you want. I'm too lazy to do that. I tend to just look at the reference. I like the fact that each card comes out as unique. So you can see I left the outline of the beard in there. And I was trying to pick a color for gloves. Thought, well, blue will work, and put them up. Now, if you think about it and you look at this, I drew this thumb wrong, but I'll live through it. It's like he's got his hand up in the air with his thumb facing down. I think if you were, it would be turned over a little bit more maybe, but this is kind of an impression cartoon type of deal. So a lot of those little details don't matter. You'll notice I left a collar where I'm going to come back with white gouache later on and put that like a fuzzy cotton part around his robe there on the end of the hand. So putting the nose in, we're using a light mixture of sienna. This is another one of those gnomes that doesn't have eyes. The eyes are up underneath the hat. You'll also notice that I'm still staying away from the red because the red is slightly wet. And if I touch it with the sienna, it'll run up into the hat. Not that in a lot of cases that's a bad thing. You can get away with that, and it actually creates some realistic looking shadows. The fun thing about watercolor is once you get the initial expense out of the way, you can mess around with your painting, and it's kind of fun. It's relaxing. So I'm going to put some trees in, and I've got a pretty hard edge on there. I'll fix that here in a little bit in the background. And I'm putting more water in with the mix. Now, if you've got too hard an edge up in the tree on the back, because you want it to be soft the further away it is, what you can do is not pick up paint, but you can pick up a little bit of water and put a little water over the top edge of that. Or you can come back in with a paper towel. You should always keep a paper towel or a tissue stuffed in your hand. And if you get something on there right away, the time to get it is before it starts to dry. Now, we could do some masking if you really wanted to get this guy and keep him pure. You could draw him in there and then mask him out. In this case, I'm just going to paint around him, and I can get away with that here. We will do some masking lessons. In Jordy's kit, there is a masking pen, and I'll show you how I deal with masking. Some things you just can't do in watercolor without the masking, unless you paint really carefully and have it well planned out. So there's a case where I thought that was getting a little bit too dark, and I just came in with my paper towel and took it off. There are some good videos out there on how to do trees. I don't claim to be a tree expert, but these are just representing trees and not necessarily a good tree shape. And plus they're in the background, so they're going to be a little bit blurrier. And you can see I'm coming down. The red in the hat is pretty much dry at this point, so there's not a great danger of that green going into the red. And you can see those trees have pushed the snow in the background back behind it further, and they've pushed the gnome to the forefront here by silhouetting him. This is really simple watercolor. We're going to get more and more advanced. We're going to get into some color theory as we go along, and I'll show you how to make a bright light up here. We didn't do it in this. I didn't do it in this one. It's just a straightforward washes to do the light when we get to the lantern. But we'll get into some opposing color theory, and I'll show you some cool tips and techniques. I've got just a little bit of Payne's gray with a touch of blue in it here, and I'm just putting in some beard hairs. And we'll come back with a couple of washes over that. You've seen in the past, blue tends to represent white in a lot of cases. For me, I will paint a light blue where you would have normally had a white before, and the white blue represents the shadows. So we went to burnt sienna to put the shoes in, still painting on dry. We're not wetting the paper and then going there. And that tends to give you, like I said, a harder edge. And a harder edge means more detail. You guessed it. So the lantern would be sitting up in here, and while I've got the burnt sienna, that's as good a time as any. Put the ring in. Now, I do not draw very well. I draw pretty roughly. But one of the things that I know is, you see the bottom of the cap for that lantern? It's curved. If you look at perspective and you're starting to do bowls and round cylinders and that sort of thing, they are not square. And there it is again, round on the bottom. And then I'm just going to put a hint of a shadow on the bottom of the lantern. So there's the lantern outline. I want to come back and fill in the cap with the brown. Keep in mind that all watercolors tend to dry lighter. So here's a blue wash that I'm getting ready to put in, and I'm putting it in on his beard. So the blue represents the shadows behind a white, if that makes sense. If you're doing snow, a lot of people, and myself included, will do snow with blue washes. And the washes in the blue represent the shadows. Now, sometimes, typically in the winter, it's a cold, and blue is a cold color versus a warm color. We don't want to get too deep into that right now. But if the sky is blue, the snow will have a blue tint. If the sky is yellow, which is a little bit warmer on the warmer color side, the snow will have a yellow tint. And consequently, so whatever color you use in the sky in your paintings, whether it be a landscape or what, the snow will reflect that sky color. So now I'm using gouache, and I came in and I'm putting on the white. Now you'll see me do probably 2 applications of this. The gouache is the only one that I take straight out of the tube. I don't let that dry in the palette. There is some dried in my palette, and I'll use it for a light wash, but typically it's better used full strength right out of the tube. It is not a watercolor, and a lot of watercolor purists will poo-poo you for using that, but it technically would be a mixed media at that time. I'm going to do some little pen and ink highlighting on this one later on. So with the gouache, the watercolor, and the pen and ink, technically this guy would be a mixed media. And I'm not a purist. I paint because I enjoy it. I don't try to paint to maintain any standard. Now that's not to say that I ignore the rules. You can't ignore all the rules and come up with something that's acceptable. There's a reason why certain rules have developed and why they can get away with teaching art school. So someone has figured out what happens if you do things a certain way, and there's no reason not to take that information and save yourself some time. So I'm just doing little washes, wet washes of yellow, and I thought that snow was a little bit too yellow, and that may or may not be the case. You need to make those decisions for yourself. But I faded it in. So I went back to the red. Now that everything is relatively dry, I can go ahead and close a couple of those gaps up that I had before, or I was afraid to touch certain elements, because if one is wet and you touch it with another color, that will bleed back into that. Plus I want it a little bit darker. Remember I said the light is coming from that lantern? Therefore, he would be in shadow a little bit more. So You can see I missed a frame of filming or something. I put in some of the white or the blue snow washes, but now I have a gel pen. This is just a black gel pen, and I wanted a little bit more contrast. And I'm not outlining the whole thing, but I am doing some outlining shadow in this, and that just helps bring out different areas of the painting. So this left side would be, a lot of more of this would be in shadow, so it would be higher definition. It's kind of neat to look at the left one that I painted before and the one on the right. They do look different. They're just slightly different in the poses. And this is a unique thing if you're going to paint the same thing over and over again. I was watching an artist the other day who's famous, and I can't remember his name, but he was painting a painting live, and someone asked him, you planned this all out. You've done this, the sketches and the stuff working up to this landscape painting. How do you determine what do you do with it after that? And he said, it's pretty simple. If I like the painting and I like the way it turned out, I will frame it. And if I like it a lot, I will not sell it. But if I like it and frame it, then I might probably sell that painting. If I don't like it, I will put it away in a temp drawer for 2 or 3 months, up to 6 months. And then I'll pull it out and take a look at it, and I have a new perspective on whether I like it or not. And I may do a little more painting on it at that point, or I may put it back in the permanent file to look at several years down the road. I tend to do the same thing. I will take a painting and work on it, and then at some point determine that it's probably done, and I may not like it at that point. So I put it away, and then 6 months or a year later, it gets pulled out, and I find I really like it. So this guy, you can see what I did with the highlights on the left there, just lightly where the light is, and he's obviously missing a final step that I like to do, and we'll get to that in a second. I talk about, Jordy talks about Jordy Johnson and Just Carve Rob and those guys. You should go check them out on the wood carving side. But you should always sign your work, and that's just my theory on that. There's no reason that people should have to guess who painted it. I can assure you, my mother did some artwork. My mother-in-law did artwork. My father-in-law has done some wonderful carvings. And always, always, always sign your work. Because it's neat. People will be interested in it when you pass away. I can assure you, your relatives and your kids will be like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is something that Mom or this is something that Dad painted. So the guy is pretty much sitting in there. He's you look at the background. We did the salt. The trees are kind of muted. And then coming down, we've got just a hint of blue in there representing the snow. And the light is diffused on there. And you can make the decision. So this is just a little bit of white gouache, thinned down quite a bit. This makes a really neat mess by splattering crap all over the place. Everything gets white specks on it. The beauty of watercolor is that these all wash up pretty easy. So to me, the speckling or this on this, a lot of paintings, I'll even do this in landscapes into a tree or something. It's a technique that brings out some really neat detail. And there's different ways to flick this stuff. If you get a brush or two that works well for you for flicking stuff on there. Some people use their fingernail. You can try it out on a scrap piece of paper and develop your own flicking technique. Now, this is the white gouache. Now, sometimes I'll come back in with a light blue and flick that around a little bit. In this case, I did not. So we talked about signing your paintings. There's any number of ways to do it. A lot of the great masters used a pencil. A lot of watercolorists will use a pencil. This case, I had the pen with me sitting there, so I used the gel pen. In other cases, I will take a Payne's gray or a blue and go ahead and do it with a rigger brush. This is the most fun part of the painting. When you put that tape on there, and like I said before, always dull it down a little bit, like putting it against your jeans or against your coat or something, so it's not quite as sticky, and it will have less tendency to tear the paper. But this is the fun part. This is where it becomes a true painting standing on its own. This kind of gives it a border with the tape. I am going to change. I've got a new lighting set up for the future, and I'm getting rid of that orange board which sucks up the light. But there is the guy. There's the card ready to go. You can write anything you want on there. And the reference for him is moving forward. I'm sure I stole this from something online at some point. But there's an older card that I did. And you can see how they kind of evolve. So, hey, thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Student on the Lake Watercolor. So, like, share, comment, and we've got lots of new subscribers. So let's get this up over 1,000. Thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake.